Now, the police realized they were dealing with a calculated killer. They found a pattern. Only officers connected to Udoka's arrest were being targeted. The realization sent chills down their spines, and an investigation team was launched. Now, let's go back to how it all started. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. In a small town of Edeke, life moved at its own rhythm. The marketplace bustled with traders calling out their wares. The smell of roasted yams and fried plantain filled the air, and children ran barefoot, their laughter echoing through the streets. Amidst this lively town lived Udoka, a young man in his late 20s. Known for his hard work and calm demeanor, Udoka was a carpenter who made beautiful furniture. But beneath his hard-working exterior, Udoka carried a loneliness he couldn't shake. One market day, Udoka headed to the town square, balancing a beautiful carved stool on his head. He hoped to sell it to a trader visiting from a distant village. As he made his way through the crowded paths, he collided with a woman carrying a basket of oranges. The stool fell to the ground, and oranges rolled in every direction. "I'm so sorry," Udoka apologized, kneeling quickly to gather the scattered fruits. The woman smiled warmly, her brown eyes meeting his. "It's okay. It was an accident," she said, brushing down off the dust in her wrapper. As they collected the oranges, Udoka couldn't help but notice how graceful she was. "I am Udoka," he said shyly, handing her the last orange. "Adanna," she replied with a smile that made his heart skip. Udoka offered to carry her basket, and they walked together to her store. Their conversation flowed easily, and by the time they reached her store, Udoka was smitten. Adanna was not only beautiful, but also intelligent and kind. She was from a neighboring village, selling fruits to support her younger siblings after their parents had passed away. From that day, Udoka made excuses to visit the market just to see her. He brought her small gifts, a carved comb, a wooden bracelet, and once a basket of fresh fish. Adanna, in turn, would save her sweetest oranges for him. They often sat under the big baobab tree at the edge of the market, talking about their dreams. Months passed, and Udoka realized he couldn't imagine a life without Adanna. One evening, under the soft glow of the moon, he knelt before her with a small carved box in his hand. Inside was a simple golden ring. "Adanna," he began, his voice trembling with emotion. "Will you marry me and make me the happiest man in Edeke?" Tears welled up in Adanna's eyes. "Yes, Udoka, I will marry you." Their engagement became the talk of the town. Elders from both families met to finalize the bride price. Udoka's family presented the traditional gifts: yam tubers, jars of palm wine, kola nuts, and a goat. Adanna's family accepted them, blessing the union. As the wedding day approached, the town buzzed with excitement. Women gathered to sing and sew Adanna's wedding attire, a bright blue wrapper with intricate patterns. Udoka's friends helped him prepare a new home for his bride, painting the walls and arranging handmade furniture. The day before the wedding, Udoka and Adanna exchanged heartfelt promises. "I will always protect you," Udoka said, holding her hands. "And I will always stand by you," Adanna replied. Udoka barely slept that night, excitement coursing through him. As dawn broke, He got on his bike to fetch supplies for the wedding. His heart was light, but he had no idea his life was about to change forever. The sun rose brightly over Edeke, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Udoka was on his bike, humming a cheerful tune. He had a list of last-minute items he needed for the wedding. A bottle of palm wine for the elders, more vegetables for the feast, and kola nuts for the traditional ceremony. The road was dusty, lined with trees, and swayed in the gentle morning breeze. As Udoka pedaled through the quiet path leading to the market, his thoughts were filled with Adanna. He pictured her in her wedding attire, her radiant smile lighting up the day. He couldn't wait to say, "I do." As he approached the main road, his joy was interrupted by the sight of a police checkpoint. A line of officers stood in the middle of the road, rifles slung over their shoulders. Their stern faces gave no room for friendly banter. "Stop!" one of the officers barked, raising a hand. Udoka immediately slowed down, parked his bike by the side of the road. "Where are you going to this early?" the officer asked, his tone sharp. "To the market," Udoka replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "I need supplies for my wedding today." The officer raised an eyebrow, then gestured to his colleagues. Without warning, two officers approached Udoka, grabbed his arm, and pinned him against the bike. "Hey, what's going on?" Udoka exclaimed, panic creeping into his voice. "You are under arrest," one officer said coldly. "For what?" Udoka shouted, struggling against their grip. "For the murder of the commissioner's son," the officer replied. Udoka's heart stopped. "What? Murder? I don't even know the commissioner's son." The officers ignored his protest. One of them slammed handcuffs onto his wrist, while others threw his bike into their truck. The villagers who witnessed the scene murmured in confusion. As the police van sped off, Udoka's mind raced. Who had killed the commissioner's son? Why was he being blamed? What would happen to Adanna and their wedding? Udoka was thrown into a dingy cell at the police station. The stench of sweat and decay filled the air, and the only light came from a small barrel window. He spent the night pacing, his heart pounding with fear and frustration. The next day, he was taken to court. The room was filled with strangers, their eyes judging him. The commissioner sat in the front row, his face a mask of grief and anger. The prosecutor wasted no time painting a grim picture of Udoka as a cold-blooded killer. Witnesses claimed they had seen him fleeing the scene of the crime. Evidence was present. A knife with bloodstains, allegedly found near his workshop. "But I didn't do it," Udoka shouted, standing up. "I have never even held a knife like that before." The judge silenced him with a stern glare. "You will speak when you are spoken to." Udoka's family and Adanna sat at the back, tears streaming down their faces. Adanna tried to speak in his defense, but the court refused to hear her. After hours of deliberation, the judge delivered the verdict. "Udoka, you have been found guilty of the murder of the commissioner's son. You are hereby sentenced to 15 years in prison." Udoka felt the world collapse around him. His knees buckled, and he was dragged out of the courtroom in chains. Udoka was taken to Ekulobia Maximum Prison, a grim fortress surrounded by high walls and barbed wire. Inside, the air was thick with despair. The guards were ruthless, and the inmates eyed him like vultures. His first few weeks were hell. He was beaten by inmates who wanted to assert their dominance. The food was barely edible, and the nights were filled with the sound of screams and weeping. But Udoka refused to break. He spent his days working in the prison workshop and his nights plotting ways to survive. He made a few allies, inmates who also claimed to be innocent victims of injustice. Together, they shared stories of betrayal and pain. Their countenance, the only light in the darkness. Still, the thought of Adanna kept him going. He imagined her waiting for him, her love giving him the strength to endure. 15 years passed like a slow death. When Udoka was finally released, his heart was heavy with a mix of hope and dread. He walked out of the prison gates, his body frail but his spirit burning with a desire for justice. Edeke had changed. The streets were busier, the faces less familiar. He made his way to his family's house, but the joy of reunion was short-lived. His mother had passed away years ago, and his siblings had scattered to other towns. Udoka's first thought was to find Adanna. He asked around, but the answers he received broke his heart. Adanna had waited for years, but when it became clear that Udoka might never return, she had married another man and moved away. Udoka felt something inside him snap. Everything he had cherished had been taken from him. His freedom, his family, and the love of his life. The injustice burned in his soul like a wildfire. He vowed to make those who had wronged him pay, starting with the men who had arrested him. Udoka sat alone in his childhood home, staring at the cracked walls. Memories of his arrest replayed in his mind. How the officers had humiliated him, how they had laughed at him when he pleaded he was innocent. He clenched his fist as a dark resolve grew within him. "I will make them pay," he whispered to himself. The first step of his plan was to find out where the officers from his arrest were stationed. He began by visiting old friends and acquaintances, pretending to catch up while subtly steering the conversation towards the police. He would wake up drenched in sweat, fists clenched, muttering to himself, "I will make them pay." He began spending hours in silence, plotting his revenge. His first step was to find the officers involved in his wrongful imprisonment. He remembered their faces vividly, but needed names and current locations. At a local tavern, he struck up conversation with old friends, disguising his true intentions, pretending to be a man interested in joining the police force. He asked subtle questions. From snippets of gossip, he learned that Sergeant Bala, the officer who had humiliated him most, was now stationed in a nearby town. Udoka's resolve hardened. Bala had been the one who smirked as he was dragged into the station, calling him a lowly criminal in front of the crowd. Bala would be the first of his targets. For days, Udoka shadowed Sergeant Bala, carefully observing his movements. He discovered that Bala lived alone in a modest bungalow and often walked home late from the station. On a rainy evening, Udoka saw his opportunity. Dressed in dark clothes, he waited in an alley near Bala's house. The sergeant, oblivious to the danger, walked briskly, umbrella in his hand. "Remember me, Sergeant Bala," Udoka hissed as he emerged from the shadows. Bala's eyes widened in recognition, but before he could react, Udoka struck him with a crowbar. The strike was swift and brutal, leaving Bala motionless on the ground. Udoka dragged the body into the alley, ensuring it wouldn't be discovered immediately. He stood over Bala's lifeless form, his heart pounding with adrenaline and a grim sense of justice. The discovery of Bala's body sent shockwaves through the local police force. Officers doubled their patrols, and checkpoints sprang up across town. Udoka knew he had to be more careful. He couldn't afford mistakes, but the fire of revenge burned brighter, and with every passing day it became more visible. His next target was Inspector Jide, the man who had taunted him during his trial. Jide was known for his gambling habits, often frequenting a seedy casino on the outskirts of town. Udoka watched Jide for several nights, studying his routine. Finally, on a moonless night, he followed Jide home. The inspector, slightly drunk, walked carelessly, humming to himself. Udoka attacked swiftly, using a rope to strangle him. "Do you remember me now?" Udoka whispered as Jide gasped for breath. The officer's body fell limp, and Udoka fled into the darkness, leaving no trace of his presence. By now, the police realized they were dealing with a calculated killer. They found a pattern. Only officers connected to Udoka's arrest were being targeted. The realization sent chills down their spine, and an internal investigation was launched. Udoka, however, was always one step ahead. He had learned the art of patience in prison, and he used it to his advantage. Disguising himself as a wandering laborer, he moved between towns, staying under the radar while continuing his mission. His third target was Corporal Emeka, a young officer who had mocked him during his first night in the cell. Emeka often stopped at a roadside bar after his shifts. Udoka waited for him that evening, his heart pounding with anticipation. As Emeka stumbled out of the bar, Udoka followed him into a deserted alley. This time, the kill was messy. Emeka fought back, scratching Udoka's arm before succumbing to the blade. The scratch Emeka left on Udoka's arm became infected, forcing him to visit a local herbalist. The woman, suspicious of his injury, asked too many questions, but Udoka deflected them with vague answers. Meanwhile, the police intensified their search. They set up roadblocks and interrogated locals, but Udoka's careful planning kept him hidden. However, he knew he couldn't keep up to this forever. The walls were closing in. Udoka continued his spree, targeting officers in different towns. Each kill brought him closer to closure, but also increased the risk of capture. The police were closing in, piecing together fragments of evidence and witnesses' accounts. His method became more daring, ambushing an officer on a remote village or a remote road, poisoning another's drink, and even setting a trap that led to a car explosion. Each kill was personal, a calculated move in his quest for vengeance. But with every strike, Udoka felt the weight of his actions. He began to question himself, wondering if his revenge would ever bring him peace. The police devised a plan to lure Udoka out. They spread false information about a gathering of officers in a remote village, knowing he wouldn't be able to resist the opportunity. Udoka, desperate to complete his mission, took the bait. As he approached the location, he sensed something was off. The silence was too perfect, the shadows too still. Before he could retreat, armed officers surrounded him. "It's over, Udoka," one of them shouted. Udoka fought fiercely. His survival instincts kicked in. He managed to injure 2 officers before they overpowered him. Handcuffed and bloodied, he was dragged to the station, his defiance shining through his battered face. "You think this is justice?" he spat. "You created one." Udoka's trial was a spectacle, drawing crowds from far and wide. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and witnesses recounted the crimes in chilling details. When asked why he had committed the murders, Udoka's voice was steady. "You took everything from me, my freedom, my future, my love. I only returned the favor." The judge's verdict was swift: life imprisonment without parole. The courtroom erupted in murmurs, some condemning Udoka, others sympathizing with his plight. As Udoka was led away, he caught a glimpse of Amara's parents in the crowd. Their faces was a mixture of anger and sorrow, a mirror of the emotions they churned within him. Back in prison, Udoka became a ghost of his former self. He spent his days in silence, replaying the events that had led him to this point. He thought of Amara, of the life they could have had, and the choices that had sealed his fate. In the end, Udoka's story became a cautionary tale in Edeke, a grim reminder of how injustice can breed monsters and how vengeance can consume a man's soul. Thanks for watching till the end. What is your take on the story? Please tell us in the comment section. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel to get the latest stories and updates. I see the hot.